Nazi Germany had caused more than 20 million was, of course, Nazi Germany had caused more than 20 million deaths in the Soviet Union. And at the end of 1945, the Soviet Union, which had been more destroyed and had suffered more than any other country in the total deaths, demanded demilitarization of Germany. The United States said no. Starting in the late 1940s, the US started to arm Germany. And by 1951, the US zone of occupation, together with the British and French zone of occupation, had become the Federal Republic of Germany and had been incorporated into the new US military alliance, into NATO. And the Russians, the Soviets, were very concerned about this because this was a remilitarization of a country that just a few years earlier had invaded and caused more than 20 million deaths. And the Soviet Union was saying to the United States, we need a peace treaty. We need an agreement. We need to stop the remilitarization of Germany. And the US was saying, no, we are NATO. We're against you. We will defend against you. And after Stalin's death and Khrushchev coming to power in 1955, the Soviet Union tried again. And the Austrian state declared its neutrality, and the Soviet army went home. And the message was, neutralize Germany and we can end the threat to us and we can find a new peace arrangement in Europe. The United States completely rejected the idea, said we will not have a neutral Germany, we'll have a militarized Germany. Our leading diplomat and historian in 1955, our greatest Russia expert, George Kennan, argued vigorously, let us have a neutral Germany. This way we'll have peace. This way we can end the confrontation with the Soviet Union. He was the author, no less, of the containment policy. But he said, I don't mean containment to be a new Cold War or hot war. I mean it to be a prudent policy. We should neutralize Germany. And in 1957, he gave the BBC Wreath lectures calling for this, but he wasn't listened to. So we had a Cold War and an arms race and no peace, and nearly blew up the world in 1962, 61 years ago, because of a nuclear confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the roots of that, if you look deeply, actually involve Berlin and Germany. If you look deeply at the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was about the same issue. This is almost completely not understood, except by our finest historians. But it's not the way we tell the story at all. So the US gave up the chance for peace. Miraculously, the world survived. Then arose a very wise and peaceful and peace-seeking leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was truly a great man. an incredibly decent person. I had the privilege to be on his economic advisory team for 1 year, trying to help mobilize Western support for a collapsing Soviet economy. I failed completely in that because the US, again, was uninterested in doing anything, even to help a peace-seeking leader of the Soviet Union. And as you know, Mr. Gorbachev, President Gorbachev, unilaterally disbanded the Warsaw Pact military alliance in 1990. And at that moment, the leaders of the United States and Germany promised Gorbachev, we will not take advantage of that by expanding NATO even 1 inch eastward in response to your action. Of course, Gorbachev fell the next year, in part because of the financial crisis that the Soviet Union was facing, that the United States refused to help. And as soon as the Soviet Union ended, the strategists in the Pentagon and the White House and the CIA immediately began to plan the expansion of NATO. And so again, the US turned down peace. It could not take yes for an answer. I happen to be rather deeply inside the process in the Soviet, then Russian side, because after Mr. Gorbachev fell from power, President Yeltsin asked me to help advise Russia. I said, surely, Mr. President, the United States will understand now to give financial help. Maybe it could not understand with the Soviet Union, but surely with an independent Russia now. And again, the United States absolutely said we're not helping at all. And so just as these two leaders were saying, we want peace, we want normalcy, we want the end of conflict, the United States began planning the unipolar world. Quite literally planning step by step. Even leaders in the Pentagon told one of the generals that I know rather well, Wesley Clark, that now the United States will launch several wars to overthrow Russian allied governments because we now know that Russia can do nothing in response. This is what Clark was told in the early 1990s. And the list included Iraq with Saddam Hussein, Syria with Assad, Libya with Muammar Gaddafi. And those are the wars that came. Those were planned wars. And the NATO enlargement was planned starting in 1992, but really planned in detail by 1997. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, the strategist and advisor to President Carter, wrote an article in 1997 explaining the timeline of NATO enlargement to Ukraine to be between 2005 and 2010. Of course, the Russian leadership said, no, don't do that. That's our red line. Don't cross it. The United States said, we don't hear you. You don't have any say in this. It's literally NATO doctrine, literally. It's enshrined in NATO doctrine that no country outside of NATO has any say in where NATO will enlarge, even if NATO is enlarging to a 2,000-kilometer border of the country. So the United States said, we will enlarge to Ukraine, And Russia, you have no say in it whatsoever. In 2007, President Putin said, don't do this. Do not do this. We're very concerned